Yeah, welcome to everyone that's just jumping on. Good to see some familiar names in the chat. Yeah, cool. All right, so if you hit record, yeah, welcome to the May 2024 Power BI for Enviro's session. For those people that are new to our group, I'm Christian Bovat from Discovery Eye. I'm from Perth in Western Australia calling in. We've been running this group for probably about 2.5 years now, I think, and our main mission is just to give people a forum to be able to share case studies, largely focused around Power BI, data visualization, data management, but for the environmental and the water industry. So it's an opportunity for people to learn new tips and tricks, ask questions of our speakers, ask questions of people in our community, and really just focusing on empowering Enviros on their Power BI journey. So welcome to everyone, especially if you're dialing in for the first time. Just bit of housekeeping. We're all very familiar with the virtual setting now after obviously a few years post-COVID, but just as a courtesy to Ayman today, our speaker, please just mute yourself when not speaking. I think most people have done that, so thank you. Type your questions in the chat if you sort of want. We'll get a bit of a stockpile going. I'll try and answer them, via chat. Otherwise, Ayman's made himself available. Like if we stop him, we have a few different Q&A sessions, and really just focus on getting this engagement and robust conversation happening. Yeah. As I just mentioned, this session is being recorded. It'll be shared afterwards on the YouTube channel and also through the meetup group with the link. Just a Teams tip, as we all kind of know, you can sort of zoom in to the presenter's shared screen, and by holding the control and scroll. I also found out you can also right click on people's pictures and go fit to frame if they're sort of looking portrait. So I've just done that with you, Ayman, and now I can see your whole backdrop and stuff as well. So yeah, if people didn't know that one. Just before we get into a little bit more of the thing, part of the reason we've been a little bit quiet in this space is we had a son earlier this year, little Lucas, who was born in February. Obviously, it's been a bit of handful, but he's nearly 4 months. He's going really well. So I do apologise, people. We've sort of been putting a few things on hold in the meetup space, but we're back. And yeah, this is the little dude. So yeah, thought I'd just share him. In terms of acknowledging, like to acknowledge the Bibleman people, the traditional owners of the land on which I'm dialing in from today, and pay my respects to the Whadjuk people as well and their elders, both past and present. I think it's important to sort of recognise, the beauty that is around us, no wonder where you're sort of dialing in from, and be appreciative and, understanding of the traditional owners and the history of the lands that we're sort of dialing in from, and pay our respects to those people. So just like to acknowledge them. And also acknowledge the Indigenous sort of peoples from where you're dialing in from across both Australia and also globally. Again, here in Australia, those who don't know, Ayman's actually dialing in from Austin, Texas, so that's like he referred to here in Australia. But Australia got National Volunteer Week this week. This year's theme is something for everyone, recognises the diverse passion and talents that people have in terms of active volunteering. So I'd really encourage you volunteering sort of things, environmental causes, community outreach, education or beyond. Sort of both, myself personally being volunteer, but also had support of volunteers from various different events. Across Australia in the water space, more in the environmental space, we have the River Basin Management Society, mostly out of the East Coast, but I think they're looking to develop a Perth-based branch, and the Australian Water Association. So I know some people on the call would obviously be part of these groups, more active members, but whatever it comes to volunteering, highly encourage people to have a bit of a look and see what's out there at the moment. As long as you've got the time and things, but it is a great cause no matter where you are. Discovery Eye, our company, sort of put on these meetups. Like I said, we try and do it every month. Sort of work we focus on is a range of different things, mostly around Power BI training, sort of end-to-end analytics, and also custom visuals, largely focused in the environmental and water space. So if you have any questions around that, please feel free to reach out to me or Alice or anyone as part of our team. But the main reason everyone's here, we've got Ayman Alafifi, Dr. Ayman Alafifi, sorry, presenting on planning water supply and demand scenarios through interactive Power BI dashboards. Just to introduce you, Ayman, quickly as well. So in this session, Ayman will be focusing on some real world examples of how public water providers and private consumers can use Power BI to forecast water demand, compare and rank different supply alternatives looking into the future, and really help plan for the uncertainty that we're all facing around climate change, population growth in various areas. And a lot of these unknown and new variables that are sort of impacting our water supply systems and our sort of demand at the same time. So Ayman's joining us from Austin, Texas. It's outside of his business hours, so we are very much appreciative of Ayman donating a little bit of your time, mate. Thank you. He's got over 14 years consulting experience in urban water resources planning and management, and he's also a trained data scientist and expert in business intelligence. He's led multiple hydraulic and hydrological modelling and planning events, and including being the technical lead for a number of large-scale projects involving building business and decision support tools. So he's got a lot of experience in leveraging various technologies, automation, cloud computing, and obviously dashboards, helps streamline planning and operations of complex systems, address alternatives, feasibility studies, and really improve communication to various stakeholders and clients in the modelling outputs and these sorts of things through these different tech. Currently, Ayman works as the technical innovation group at EKI Water and Environmental Consulting Firm. Main focus, developing dashboards and decision support tools to help these clients efficiently manage their environmental data. So for a lot of people on the call, this is probably, very familiar, whether it is more in the Power BI and IT space or more in the environmental or water space. Or Ayman, as you've sort of, in terms of your history, that perfect overlap and balance between the two, which must be a lot of fun to work in, if not obviously challenges, which I do recognise and understand. But mate, that's it from me. I'll hand it over to you now for the main floor, and really looking forward to today's session. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Tristan, for the introduction, and congrats on Lucas. Certainly looks very, very cute in that picture. I am expecting one myself this August, so I'll be offline for a few weeks when he arrives. So certainly I understand where you're coming from.
Congratulations.
So thank you. So like you said, so I come from a water resources engineering background, actually a civil engineer, then a water resources engineer. I had an interest for a long time in the data visualization aspect of the work that we do, because like most of you who've done work in civil or environmental engineering, you know how much data we work with. And oftentimes the part that you mentioned in my bio about like communicating that complex data, numerical models, the kind of things that we deal with stakeholders, with the public, was something that I found a big gap in, that I thought these tools that we have out there are really useful because they help us communicate better. It forces us to rethink about how we're designing visuals and graphs and things like that. So what I want to share with you today are a few of those examples. So let me pull up my PowerPoint here, and I only have one slide, so I'm not gonna, oops. Sorry. I don't know what's going on. Sorry, my video has been acting up today. Pardon. So what I want to share with you today are a few examples of the work that I've done before, primarily in the water supply and demand planning, particularly because what I found really useful over the years is the work that I've been doing on trying to get the data from just the simple models. Sometimes it's Excel spreadsheet models, sometimes they're like simple visualization models, into things that are easy enough for people to understand. So I'm going to run through a few examples with you today, with a few caveats that I want to talk about. Some of those are things that I've done for clients. So almost all the data that I'm going to share with you today are made up data. So I can censor most of the data in respect of the client's own data, even if they gave me the permission to share the tools themselves. For most of the dashboards, most of them were done for clients in the public sector. Some are for the private sector clients. So there will be some logos for clients that I kept there that I had their permission to share those dashboards. But in general, when all the data that I'm sharing are not actual or real data. So just keep that in mind. The other thing is some of those are dashboards or tools that I built over the years. Some were kind of done in older version of Power BI and haven't got to updating them, because for the most part, those were things that I've done as part of ongoing projects. So when projects are over and I deliver the dashboards to clients, there often is little need to go back and update those, especially if they were used for a specific purpose. So with that, all right. Did I lose the screen share?
We did just for the moment, yeah.
Oh. Try that again. I don't know why I got a message from Teams. Okay, let me know when you see my screen.
Sorry, that might have been me just letting people know to type questions in the chat, so hopefully it doesn't impact anything else. Cool.
Okay.
Screen share's back. We're all good.
Good. Okay, perfect. All right. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And again, I promise this is my only slide. So the process of doing supply and demand analysis typically for most engineering projects is we start as part of the planning committee, whether this is a city that has some expected growth. They're planning for projected demand. They come up with some numbers for what is the expectation for growth within the city. They're expecting new developments to happen. They're expecting more population growth. They expect more industrial or agricultural land. So they come up with a plan to kind of project what that future demand looks like. In reality, between when they set that plan up, when they create that plan, and when they get to the planned horizon, demand starts happening. There are actual demand. Developers come in, they start building, they apply for permit, depending on different states here in the US. There are different regulations, but typically they go to the city or the water provider and ask for water. They need approval from the city that the city is able to meet that demand. So what was on paper a planning effort of an expectation of, let's say, 10, 20,000, for example, more people, when those developers come in with their applications, those are the actual numbers. So that's the reality check of how much water they actually need, whether we have enough water to meet their demand. So that brings us to the supply side, where different water providers, depending on where you are, those could be cities, those could be water supply agencies. They are in charge of the water resources, so they know how much water they have available. So they come up with a list of different alternatives. They might have more than one source of water. They might have groundwater, might have surface water, some water stored in reservoirs, etc. So they list all the different alternatives they have, and then they do this really interesting analysis of trying to match the expected demand in the future with the available supply sources that they have. And this is really interesting because at this point, they come up with a list of alternatives or options, and then they go through this process internally and with the public to agree on a set of projects that they need to invest some real money into, to either drill new wells, expand the capacity of reservoirs, building new elevated tanks or things like that. So that's the master planning effort, and then they go after chasing some grants or loan, and then they start on the implementation side. So this really cycle, and I'm sorry if this is super familiar to you if you come from this space, but for those who are data or Power BI developers, this might be a useful background. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is there are bits and pieces of this entire process where I found Power BI as a tool to be particularly useful, where every time where you have a group of people who get together, they need to make a decision. They're trying to get away from only using spreadsheets, or there's an iterative process of back and forth. Power BI has proven to me to be a very useful tool for these types of application. So I'm gonna run through some of those applications with you, and I might flip back to this screen just to show you where this might be particularly useful. So let's start with this first part here, where you're planning the you have an expectation for what your land use might be in the future. In the state of California, where I do a lot of my work, they typically end up creating something called the Urban Water Management Plan, which is basically a projection of all demand and supply. And they get to a point where they have a projected demand, and then developers come in and apply for the right to use water, or they want to make sure they want the city to give them a letter that they are able to supply them with water. So let's start with this part first. So let's say you're a city, you have developers who come in and they send you applications where you have some expected demand. They fill in sometimes tables like this one here, where they tell you for my project, I expect to have all these different land uses. These are the areas, these are the demand factors that I'm using, the gallon per capita per day or per square foot, something like that. And that's the expected water that I want you to tell me that you will be able to supply. Typically, cities get a lot of those applications, and they either use some Excel spreadsheets or different types of kind of ways to archive those applications. One way that I found Power BI to be particularly useful in is to put that, I'm gonna put this screen here, is to put that in a tool like this. So this was one particular tool that I've created for one of my clients, where instead of having developers send like paper applications of their expected needs, they can go in and using this Power BI dashboard, which has this Power App application, they can go in and basically fill in the new project form, where they can put in the project information, the project details. They can put in, for example, for this particular development or project, how many new single family accounts they're expecting, and this particular water district has a set of different demand factors that the developer can choose from, and they provide justification for. And so they go through this entire process for all different types of expected water demands, for residential, for commercial, like hotel, for industrial, for agriculture. And so they get to fill out this form. They submit the form, or the city will look at one that's already been filled out by the city. So they go in, they fill out all the information for this form, they put in the address, they put some notes, they submit it. Once this form is filled out, the city would have, the water district here would have an ongoing list of all the different projected, all the different developments that apply for a water supply permit, so they can supply, so the district can supply or tell them that they are able to supply this new demand or not. And the way they do that is basically in the top part here, this is their planning effort. So they went through this effort that they do every 5 years. They project their future. They look at historically what was their water production and what their water use is, and then they look into the future. And this orange line is what they project that they will need to be able to meet into the future up to 2045, for example. And then they start receiving applications from different developments. And once they do that, this is the dashed line here that actually tells them where they were and how far are they from meeting that future demand that they were projected. So they got one application. Say for this other one here, this line goes up a little bit, and then the more they add, depending on what's the built out time frame for those different developments, you see that as long as they are still below this orange line, then they're fine. That's what they were projecting. And into the future, they are able to meet up to this orange line of projected demand. If they did an application from a developer who will push this dashed line above this orange line, that means that this exceeds their expected production capacity. So that means that they might not be able to provide water for that development. So they need to look at alternatives or ask the development to scale down. So that was one example of a way to try and just keep track of what's happening within a district without kind of resorting to many Excel spreadsheets. But for other clients, they might be interested in trying to do that more interactively. So, for example, some clients might be interested in having that form that we talked about more in a kind of a scenario format, where they say, for this particular development, they had, now this is on the development side of things, where they have a really large project that is designed for or will be designed on 3 different phases. They have all these different types of uses, so they can play with this a little bit to see, based on what they know from the expected water provider, whether what they're planning right now in this very early process, whether they will have enough water for their expected demand. So, for example, say for phase 1, they were like between 8,000 people, then they're going to jump to 50,000 and 400,000. They made some assumptions based on the expected demand of 85 gallon per capita per day. Let's say if they change that number to 100, obviously the graphs will get updated and they will get a new expected demand for residential. You can do the same thing for agriculture, for landscaping area, or even for solar power that has some minimal small demand. But what's interesting about this is once they go through this exercise of projecting their demand, then they can compare it to the supply. So on another tab that I have here, so you bring in the values from that first tab on the demand. So these are the demand bars, and now they know that they have a long list of different options on the supply side of things. So they say they know that they have, think here, like 15 different options for where they may be able to get some water from. So they can do this either iteratively and say, well, maybe we can like plug in some water from here, some water from here. Maybe we need a little bit of from here, and all of a sudden now we are the supply. Now the blue bars that were below the expected demand, those gray bars. Now by pumping more water from this basin, for example, that wasn't enough. So maybe we should try this basin here and say, oh, now we have water at least for phases 1 and 2. Phase 3 might be way too much, so we may need to go back here to the demand and scale down on phase 2. 400,000 might be too big of a population for the expected demand here. So we can go back here and adjust those numbers a little bit to see, because there are limits to what the water provider here can provide for us. So this kind of iterative approach of going back and forth will build a stronger case for them when they go present to, or when they submit an application to the water provider to tell them, here's my expected demand, and based on what I know about your potential supply, I know you can meet that by applying those options. But sometimes they might look at this a little bit differently and think about, of all the different options that I have, is there a way to try and filter through these options so I'm not bound to looking at 15 options all at once? So that's what this kind of criteria here on top is. So basically what this is a way to go through all those different options, and instead of kind of playing this guessing game, let's say I have some criteria. I only want to look at the projects that are available like immediately, or maybe now and in the next 5 to 10 years, it has some availability. And the more obviously you select these criteria, that lowers the number of available options for you, because those options where there are some kind of deciding criteria that we added at the top here to make these options either less or more desirable, depending on the different criteria that we're applying. And what this really ends up being is, if we decided that this is the collection of alternatives that we're going with, that is a way to create a portfolio of different supply options. So we go to the water provider, we tell them we looked at different water, different portfolio. Each portfolio is a collection of projects, and we design those portfolios around those criteria. So maybe portfolio one is the kind of the low risk immediate availability. Portfolio two is a kind of a medium risk long-term availability, things like that. So that's kind of like on a when you look at the uncertainty of these different supply options, applying some criteria will give you another dimension of how you look and evaluate those options. So it's not just a list of numbers. Each option has a single, for example, capacity assigned to that number. It's more, is this capacity immediately available? For example, can I pump water from sub-basin 1 today, or do I have to wait for maybe 5-10 years because that's not readily available for me? Or if I'm importing water from a neighboring agency, for example, then there's some like there are some politics I have to play. There's more that I need to weigh in as an option. So there might be some water that might be immediately available to me, but I have to go through some contracting, some partnership, some negotiation with that neighboring agency to make sure I get some of that water. So that's kind of a way to create those portfolios and try to better understand and quantify the risk of those different projects. So that's just an example of those. Any questions on the chat, or should I keep going?
None in the chat. I did have just a few, mate. These are fantastic examples. Just with your Power Apps integration to Power BI, it's always nice. Where's that talking to? And is all this built on your client's tenant, or is this sort of your tenant and then you integrate it across, or how does that sort of work?
So that's a good question. So normally we start those projects, I build them on our own tenant, and then mostly for testing purposes. This particular one, for example, is a Power App that's connected to or that writes data and reads data from an Excel file on a SharePoint site. So once we develop this with the client, then we deploy it. We ship everything to the client. The Power App itself, you can download it and then re-upload it back into the client's tenant. You obviously have to fix all the data connections and things like that, which is not fun. But then to get that kind of clean transition, we have to get everything to the client's tenant. Sometimes for some of those projects, clients are happy to keep things completely on our tenant and have us host things for them. So this and some of those others are example of projects that we just host internally and share with the clients. Obviously, they need the Power BI Pro account, but most clients are happy to pay $10 a month or something for the account and not deal with the hassle of hosting this or managing the data. So sometimes it's just an easier way to share this with clients is just to keep it in-house.
No, perfect. No, that's really good. I mean, quite often, you get the question about, does Power BI allow for write back? And through Power Apps, there is that, I guess, avenue of being able to do it, albeit it comes, as we know, with that extra licensing and things like that. But no, it's a great use case. We did have one question. Simon just wrote in the chat. He was asking, can these dashboards consider network constraints in any way? So, for example, you might have enough supply volume available for the year. You might not have the network capacity to deliver it where it is needed at that right time during the year. So does that kind of make sense how you might approach that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good question, Simon. In many ways, the way we evaluate the capacity of those different supply options is by looking at what's really constraining the capacity. So, for example, you might have a huge reservoir, but you're bound by the lowest capacity available, which might be your pipe network or the capacity of your pumps. So that's typically how we evaluate the capacity, and like you rightly say, that could vary season to season or month to month, depending on your operations. So that's all on the data side of things, where you can we build that into the input to the model. But again, that could also be one of those kind of what if scenarios that we can change in terms of like, is that capacity available? Is that capacity available? Or do you trust that capacity from like historical data, or is that something you want to play with? So you may want to reduce that a little bit, so that risk factor is something that you're considering as part of your decision making. So you're not, maybe the historical data tells you that this pipe has a capacity of X, but maybe for kind of maybe drought mitigation and making sure that your supply is reliable, you may want to reduce that a little bit, so you're accounting for any conditions that might happen that are unforeseen issues, leakage, for example, in the system, or things that might reduce that capacity beyond your control.
Yeah, no, great points and great question, Simon. Excellent. Perfect, mate. No, that's all for now. Looking forward to the next example. Please continue.
Awesome, cool. So we talked a little bit about this water supply and demand balance. And like I said, there are different ways how you do this. So one thing I forgot to mention is, and the reason why I'm showing a few examples here is, I haven't worked in my entire career on one dashboard that just does this, the whole process from start to finish. Not that you can't do it. It's just there are a lot of different moving pieces here on this process, that this ends up being multiple projects. Sometimes it's not just a single project. Rarely you do the planning and you do the implementation all in one project. There's a lot of different steps that happens throughout this project. So that's one reason why I'm trying to show different examples that just touch on this process from different angles. But unfortunately, there isn't one example that just go through this entire process from start to finish. So if this is a little bit overwhelming, I apologize, but that's the reason why. And this ends up being like a multi-year, sometimes multi-project type of effort. So it's really hard to build one thing that can last that long, especially if it's being used by different people. So we get to a point where we have like different portfolios or different projects. So typically, we do this process of doing alternative analysis where, let's say we have 10 different projects. Most cities might not have the funding to do all 10 different projects. So how do we prioritize them? We come up with some criteria, come up with some weights. We do multi-criteria decision making, and we start applying those scores and weights to basically try to come up with a prioritized list of alternatives. This approach is very iterative. You go through this with clients all the time. They might like the initial finding. We might go back and readjust those criteria, those weights, things like that. So my next example is something that is trying to address that. So let's say in this example here, where I have this list of projects, and I came up with those criteria, or I guess these are weighted criteria, where in a typical example, we would come up with those criteria. We would create a graph like this for how many 6, 7 criteria that I have in here. So you go through this process with the stakeholders, typically in a workshop setting. We select criteria, we select the weights, we come up with we rank those alternatives based on those criteria and the weights that people selected. We showed this to them. Most people are not happy with the outcome because they thought, oh, I didn't realize that criteria is that important, or it really pushed the scale on what I'm expecting. So what I found really useful is to be completely transparent and put this to clients. So let's say we have those 7, I think, criteria that I have here, weighted criteria, and we can do this real time with clients. So let's say our first run or our first cut, we ranked those criteria from top to bottom. The top ones are the ones that scored highly in this process. based on what we came up with. But then maybe based on that, people looked at this and say, oh, I actually didn't realize maybe O&M costs need to be a little bit higher. So I want to increase that. Maybe performance is actually not that critical. So I want to reduce that. So with this process, as we go through this process with clients, it become more clear to them what those criteria actually means, especially after that first cut, to see if what criteria, there are maybe some criteria that even if you increase it or decrease it, there are some, maybe those first two alternatives will always raise to the top, no matter what you do. So that tells you, well, maybe those are your top choice. Maybe you should always implement those two projects, and then we can look at the rest. So this is maybe your tier one of projects. And then there's this other interesting approach to this where we can we can decide on, let's say, for all those different projects, based on their expected lifetimes or life cycle cost and their benefits. Maybe we want to draw a box here that shows what's the threshold, what's for these, like the benefits that we defined here, where do you want to be on this scale? And in terms of the life cycle for a project, what's your comfort level here? So if you increase this a little bit, that increases this line on top a little bit more. Maybe you want to be more. So we're basically just drawing a box here around these projects, and maybe the cost per project can go up a little bit more. So say by 25. So maybe this box here is the list of preferred projects for you. Now you're looking at both this cumulative work of benefits and cost. So that tells you now in this box here, we have 10 projects of a total cost of $160 million, for example. So that tells you where you want to try and rank your projects. So you're in the sweet spot of achieving the most benefit, but also still be within a reasonable cost. And that obviously filters out those projects that might be, these two, for example, are here on paper, they look really beneficial, but they're really expensive. So maybe those were not in the sweet spot, and maybe these other projects are the ones that we need to look at. So again, the idea is really to show clients that this is a very iterative process, and clients oftentimes really stress about this process because they're making long-term investment commitments in terms of what they want to put their money to. They end up taking loans, or they might raise some their rates for their services. So you want to make sure that this process is done correctly. So this is an example of a tool that allows them to go back and forth, to iterate on that process, to think a little bit beyond the options and just the numbers, and discuss it more openly, and trying to think through what this process would look like in Excel, where we typically do this kind of cost benefit analysis, where you have like multiple tabs in a spreadsheet, and you continue to go back and forth. On one tab, you change the number, you go back to that graph, and then you go back again, change it again, etc. So that process is typically very time consuming. So a tool like this might be a little bit more helpful, especially in a workshop setting. And I found clients to really enjoy being able to have more control to the process, and it just adds more credibility to any decisions they eventually make, if that makes sense.
No, perfect. And just quickly, I mean, for the benefit of the listeners, are you using the what if scenario sliders for those, like the little slider bars?
Am I using what? Sorry, the what if?
The what if sort of parameter setup? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So for those people that sort of using Power BI, how Ayman's getting that sort of technique, that slider bar, is something called like what if scenario analysis, and you can set up your variable parameters so you can do these evaluations on the fly, exactly how he's done here, which is a great use case, mate. And like you said, it's allows the client to be able to sort of shift things based on their the results, the bias, what they think is important from a criteria perspective. So it gives them some flexibility. So no, perfect example. Thank you for sharing. Any other questions on this one for anyone? Feel free to come off mute if you have a question. Otherwise, Ayman, I think you've got another example or two. Yes?
I do, yeah.
Yep. Perfect. Hang on, there is one question that's just come in from Pranam. How about the previous scenario where you inputted the text directly? Was that also what if? So I think that was your demand analysis calculator.
Are you talking about this one?
This one, I think. Yeah. What was the process or techniques for this one?
So this one is actually a slider, but you basically you play with the slider a little bit. You remove the slider from the visual, and you just show the text box. So if I expanded this a little bit, you'll see the slider there. So it's the same thing.
Yeah. So a bit of a trick in terms of the visual. Yeah. Yeah. No, really good. Great question as well. Awesome, mate. No, please continue. This is excellent. Great examples.
Would apply search bar on date that shows that consumed. Sorry, can you be more specific? Not sure I understand what date.
Yeah. Hardy, feel free to come off mute if you wanted to ask your question. How do you apply search bar on date that shows the Consume Pro? 100% sure about one. Feel free to come off mute if you want to sort of ask your question. Sorry, it's not sure how to interpret that one. Maybe it's associated with the date slider, but I don't know if you had one of those. That's the other example.
So I'm just going to run through this really quickly. So once we design the portfolio of projects, typically put them in a master plan. So this one was for a stormwater. So unfortunately, I don't have an example for water one yet. I'm actually working on one right now, but this is an example of kind of using different types of visuals. In this case, we have an Esri map with a Mapbox map. Esri because it's easier to put the points there. Mapbox is just nicer visual, but it's a way to help clients. Say in this particular example, we were looking at different storm events and trying to evaluate what manholes basically flood at different storm events. So these are all the different manholes across the city, and this analysis was basically showing. Let's say we're looking at the 100-year event, for example, and we'll look at this particular subbasin. So we can zoom in and see where those are. And if you look, you'll see there are obviously some pipeline going on here. So those are all the nodes that were flooding in the 100-year event. They might not be flooding at the 10-year event or that maybe the 2-year event. So we expect a lot less manholes to flood there. And there are some summary tables and visuals that were kind of like interesting to the client, where they're able to slice and dice large master planning modeling report. In this case, all these different basins were modeled separately. So there were one model per basin, and then it had a script on the background that kind of collects large amount of model outputs for all these different basins. Were run for 8 different scenarios representing all these different existing and future conditions. So there's a lot more work that was done behind the scenes to get this to this format. But once we do, it just makes it a lot easier to put this in a dashboard than creating a large document or large report that has every basin, large number of tables or large tables, multi-page tables that show for each basin which manhole were flooding for what storm events, what was the volume, things like that. Where in here we're able to drill down on each individual manhole to the manhole level and be able to see whether it floods or not for different storm events and what's the volume for that flood. So again, just an example of what a master plan could look like if it's done on a Power BI. There are a few like simple examples that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I did this one very recently for a project and I found it to be really interesting, where basically we were in a workshop setting and the clients were voting on different options. So we decided, why not do this more interactively with them, to have them let's say they were voting on, we had like options for, and I'm not going to bore you with the details, but they were looking at like these different options and they were voting on them, and we wanted to get like a sense of who voted on what's the percentage of the total basin area, because that has an impact on the final vote. So we were looking at, for example, here we had like 3 options for a different purpose, and we're looking like who still hasn't voted. We have all these different entities have not casted a vote yet. Who voted for option 1? Who voted for option 2? Who voted for option 3? Something like that. So not really like something that you can build in under an hour, but it's really easy to build, but very effective with clients, especially when you're doing this live with them. So they were casting their votes. Someone was tallying the votes, putting them in an Excel spreadsheet, and the dashboard was just updating with their votes. So it just makes a lot more sense to do this interactively with them. See if you can detect any patterns in terms of like where those different agencies are. And in a sense, I mean, we had a large. This was a really big workshop where I don't know how many, 15 to 20 different districts were involved. So that was like really cool to try and do very quickly. So I'm gonna run through like two quick examples. So this is an example of something that we built for clients. That's actually something we host on our website, where we have a team who collects different data on different grants, different funding opportunities, obviously here, particularly in California. And this is a way for clients to basically just track those different grant opportunities. They can come to us and we can help them write those grants. But this is a way for them to see if they're interested in grants are coming from the Division of Water Resources. You know, we have a collection of 13 different grants. To have a deadline that still hasn't come up yet, so they can apply for those 2 grants if they're interested. They get like a snippet of what those grants are. So this kind of tooltip. Thanks, Christian and Alice, for teaching me how to do that. I learned that from one of your videos or sessions, so thanks for that. But this is a way for like our clients to be able to slice and dice through different, like we have 140 different grants that my team here follows. And then if they decided to apply for those grants, we basically keep track of what they applied for, what's the status of those grants. We keep all their grant documents on a SharePoint, so they can click on it, takes them to their SharePoint, to the document. So kind of basically creates a repository of those documents, so it's easier for them to go back to if they need to. And finally, if they started implementing those grants, we also put this in a dashboard for them, where they have like basically a project management dashboard that has different. In this example, this was for a client where they have a really large grant, so they're tracking different tasks, different deliverables, telling them whether some of those were submitted, some still work in progress. They have a timeline for different tasks, different deliverables, so they can see where they are. And something like this is easy for them to use, easy for us to keep up to date. So we don't have, so when we meet with them on a monthly basis and give them on the project management side, we give them the updates on each component, each task. They see the progress report, they see the status of their budget. So instead of just sending this as an email or a PDF, they can log in here and see it's real time, because we continue to update it on a weekly basis. So that just makes things a lot easier to communicate, and for them also to manage, especially when there are like upcoming deadlines they need to meet, or deliverables, or things that they need to start preparing for, and things like that. So those were a lot of examples. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions.
That was fantastic, Ayman. Like, yeah, no, great examples, very relevant, obviously, to the people that are on the call. So thank you so much for sharing, and great work as well. It's cool seeing some of your spatial visualizations. I I did have one question. In terms of mapping visuals, because I know you got quite a strong spatial background as well. Do you have a preference like Esri, Mapbox, Icon Map, etc., or do you think it's different visuals for different scenarios?
It's only different visuals for different scenarios. I'm not a big fan of Esri's visual, particularly because of the login requirements, and some that's just that adds another layer of complexity, especially for clients, because
Yeah.
it's either we have to host the data for them and give them credentials to log in, or they have to host the data and provide us with the credentials. So Mapbox is kind of my go-to tool because it's free, easy enough to use, but it does also have some limitations. So Icon Map is certainly very powerful. I haven't had a chance to use it extensively yet, but I know it's certainly growing since the first time I've looked at it, also in one of your webinars. But it's particularly, I think the one thing that was missing that I think Icon Map will help address is the ability to add like pipelines, vector layers of that's primarily what most of the maps that I deal with
Yeah.
are polygons and lines, and the lines are always tricky to deal with or to work with in Esri or even Mapbox. So hoping Icon Map would be the solution for that.
Yep. No, it's good points. And yeah, like your examples were great. And like even the Esri one, I totally agree with you in terms of some of the restrictions that it does provide. But like for a use case, turning layers on and on that are existing within the ArcGIS system, like of an organization's tenant, like it does have its benefits in that regard, I guess, for sure. Were there any other questions from anyone else on the call? About these great examples, feel free to come off mute, or if you just wanted to have a chat. And I know there's a few people from different water-based government agencies and water corporations, people that I've seen on the call. Yeah, if you wanted to have a bit of a chat about how it's being done internally, to a degree, it'd be great to hear from you. Otherwise, I do have a few more questions, Ayman, but yeah, I'll go as we're just sort of waiting. Hopefully someone else would like to ask a question, but I saw a few of those little light bulb icons across your reports. That was pretty consistent. Are they just static icons, or are they like click on this for more information things, or?
No, those were just static icons. I don't
Just
think
static
that I
icons.
would have any. I mean, that's a good point. There could be, I don't know, yeah, something like this. So they could be linked to like more information or something like that. Right now, I'm just using them as a static image.
Yeah, no, I don't think it needs it. The more information in terms of your description is very good, but it was more just a question whether you were sort of linking that to like a bookmark button or something for more context. But no, these are excellent. And overall, in terms of your involvement in the projects and feedback, both during project and after project from clients and stakeholders, have you found it, to be like generally a positive experience? People like, having this opportunity in stakeholder workshops to be able to play with their data?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first started kind of dabbling with Power BI, was it 6, 7 years ago, something like that. It is actually because I get this question a lot about like people like where do I start? How do I get this? Especially for those who are more like younger engineers or still trying to learn. Most of what I've seen in my career is as someone who doesn't come from like a typical data engineering or business intelligence, something like that, is those are the kind of things where you're doing your like traditional, I would say, engineering work, whether it's master planning, there are always data analysis involved, there's always data visualization involved. And I like slowly started a few years ago to kind of test what this would look like. So putting something like, I think I had a few monitoring sites for a project, and we were collecting data, and it got to a point where Excel was just too slow for what I was trying to do. So without telling my manager or even telling the client, I just put those on a Power BI on my own time. And then during one of the presentations with the client, I brought it up. It's like, here's where we are on the project, and here's the data, et cetera, et cetera. And the client really liked it, and my manager was really impressed. And I told them like this, I didn't charge the client for it. I just did it on my own time. And slowly this started becoming more and more of a habit of trying to plug this into projects wherever possible. And I found this to be really rewarding for me personally and professionally. That's something I enjoy doing, and I started kind of building more and more of practice around until I got to a point where like 100% of my projects right now are in this kind of work where clients contact us for dashboards and decision support tools rather than just being something you do on the side. So, and that's primarily because this is for those on the call who are especially like uh, on the public or the private side, you're more on the client side. This is not kind of like the typical approach for people, how people have done this before. You would go to like a software vendor or kind of a technology provider or something like that. This is becoming more and more something that people from the domain knowledge and experience, like myself, who come from civil and environmental engineering, we're learning more and more of the skill, and we're trying to apply it to our project and our project delivery approaches. So this has suddenly become more interesting, easy to build, something that actually doesn't cost a lot of money. It's fairly, if you're good in building those tools, most of these tools don't take more than, I don't know, between like a day to a week worth of work to get something up and running if you have the data in the right format and things like that. But they have the kind of long-lasting effect on clients and that wow factor that, oh, this is really cool. I want to do this long time.
I think, yeah, Simon's just written in the chat exactly what I was going to say. That personal journey of sort of, what this tool has sort of allowed you to do, and obviously being able to apply your skills and clearly your passion as well, Matt, is it's really, really nice to hear. So thank you so much for sharing. I'll just take the share back just to close out, Ayman. Given, yeah, we're bang on time as well. So it's really good. But no, thank you again. That was sensational, absolutely sensational session. So as I mentioned at the start, we have been recording this. Thank you, Ayman, for allowing that, and obviously, anonymizing some of the data and the work in the background, I'm sure. So yeah, if you did want to refer back to it, we'll have it up on our blog and our the meetup recording up on the YouTube a bit later on. As always, we're still looking, got speakers. There's a few people that have got down, but just trying to lock in some dates. But yeah, as I mentioned at the start of the session, we'll try and go back to monthly or bi-month or every 2 months, semi-regular sessions again. So if you are keen to present, look, it doesn't have to be highly technical. Even that last bit about Ayman sharing his journey about how he got into Power BI, like you can, we love to hear these stories if related to the environmental and water sector. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch if you've got something to share. It'd be great to hear from you. And yeah, thank you very much. Just a bit of information, we're always trying to put blogs and information up there, as well as so many amazing people in this general Power BI community that we form just a small component of. So yeah, I'd like to just thank again, Ayman. Fantastic session, mate. Really appreciate you dialing in and sharing that with everyone. And I'll just stop sharing and stop the recording. And I don't know, it's a bit late in your world, Ayman, I know. So if you need to get off, that's fine. But I'm happy to stay on